All right. So my name is Dr. Ross. Thanks for letting me be here today. Dr. Salgado kind of had made this presentation with Dr. Moss before. Um, and I'll have like a little special thanks section here in a second. But I kind of expanded it from social media, and I also added a lot of computer science aspects to it, as well as kind of, well, how they manipulate us a lot, you know, and for better or for worse. I'll say that a lot throughout the presentation. So, um, here we go. So yeah, special thanks, Dr. Salgado. He made the initial one. It was called Leveraging Web 2.0. And he had actually gotten the initial presentation from Dr. Moss. So it's kind of been handed down and we kind of add things onto it, as things change because I want to say, yeah, this was given about a year ago and things have changed since then. So um, this is them in their social media rounds, kind of just getting to know, what's out there and share ideas and even their social media accounts too, just to make sure that they're kind of professionally within the lines ethically, I guess. Um, so there are two sets of uh, guidelines. There's kind of the American Child in psychiatric guidelines, as well as my computer's telling me that I ran out of memory. I'm sorry. There we go. Um, so there's those guidelines, which I think can apply to psychology. However, these guidelines are much more specific for the psychological practice. And you can see these were last approved by the council in 2021. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time going through these. If you literally type this in online, it'll pull up the parameters, but we can kind of just glance at them a little bit. Um, Obviously, being aware of social media is very important, especially public access to that information, right? Uh, it's always a growing kind of tool, if you will, to be able to engage with different students, peers, clients, entities, organizations, XYZ. So it's going to continue to be used, and it's already widely used, basically. Um, Lots of ethical and professional issues that you need to think about. Uh, you have to be mindful of the public nature of social media. Think about privacy and confidentiality, especially if you're reading maybe something from a client or an old client, or maybe you're posting something about maybe not a client specifically, but so these are all things that you have to kind of think about professionally. And again, they kind of continue here to, you know, guideline 2.7, strive to maintain accurate and truthful statements about your practice, colleagues, professional psychology. Um, this stuff is very kind of cut and dry, but I think at the end of the day, we're all aware of it, but sometimes it's nice to be able to kind of have it, bullet point wise, right? Um, so let's continue. This one's kind of the big one for me. So not just psychologists, but psychiatrists and anyone in behavioral health has to be mindful on staying current in the regards to what benefits and limitations that social media can kind of have for not only us, but just society in general, especially our patients too. Um, we have to train people and educate people, and I'll kind of talk about that later too, about this topic because a lot of people just don't know. A lot of people are very naive. And I think a lot of the times, especially me as a child psychiatrist, the parents are just so naive. Like they don't even know what their kids are watching or like paying attention to, or even what's out there. So long story short, it basically states that, we have to consider the needs for more education, also training, and then just professional development for ourselves and then our colleagues as well. So they made these guidelines very encompassing. Um, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. If you want to kind of go through it more later, then you can. I don't want to spend too much time on it. Here's the AACAP kind of practice gaps. So we realized in 2017 that we don't really know what to do when it comes to social media, internet use, teens being connected, you know, virtually, YouTube, TV, like they don't know what to do with it. But we do see that it is impacting the children, which we'll kind of highlight a little bit later too. So throughout this presentation, things to consider kind of like, what is the internet? How do we use it? How is it used by the governments? How are the corporations using it? Are there implications to that use? And then what does it look like for the different categories? And then the ethical considerations we kind of talked about a little bit just a second ago. But this is all, it's all kind of together, right? So I'm sure you're wondering why I'm talking about the Industrial Revolution here, since we're talking about technology, but I want to use this just to show that advancements can be good and bad, right? So the Industrial Revolution helped us move away from basically artisanship, where people, you had to be an artist to make things. Basically, aristocrats could only buy clothes and things back then because it wasn't affordable. So mass production kind of helped increase production efficiency, lower prices, more access to goods, improve wages, medical advancements, enhanced wealth and quality of life. So it helped a lot of stuff, right? But you can't have goods without bads, right? So uh, a lot of people started coming into the cities to work at these factories, right? These factories often didn't have great working conditions. So a pro is that it did advance the safety and regulations kind of like sector to protect them. However, it caused a lot of problems, environmental hazards that they faced. The cities were polluted. People being crowded in the cities, it led to conditions for outbreaks. Um, so yeah, the good and the bad, right? And ideally, I want to kind of paint this picture for you so you think as we go through the presentation, kind of what's good and what's bad about internet and technology and, XYZ. So we can see the technological revolution kind of brought us a lot of stuff, right? Electricity, oil, gas, petroleum, automobiles, radio communication, the space race happened, communications, television. And then you can see kind of iterations of things as they advanced here at the very bottom, 8-track to tapes, CDs. I don't even know. I feel like I'm showing my age here. Do y'all know what laser discs are? It used to be like a giant DVD. It almost looked like a record. But that's what they had before like CDs and DVDs came out. So yeah. So how did we get computers and kind of what IT is, which is information technology? Computers are very specialized in processing information. That's what they do, right? Well, we had the LED was made, the transistor was made, the actual programming language was made that it exists on, and then the actual operating system was made as well. So you can see these companies, Xerox, IBM, Apple, started out making the actual like hardware and CPUs, whereas Microsoft was the one that made all the software to run on those computers. Um, Kind of a fun fact that I didn't really know is that the government really funded the development of the internet, and it was for their Department of Defense in a way through this thing called ARPANET. This is a really confusing slide. I don't know what all these numbers are over here, but you can see basically that it is a connection of a bunch of different data points that talk to each other, right? So this is kind of their first network, if you will. Um, And then this is kind of just to show you kind of how data is processed in a way. It's more to show you that, these computers are very specialized in being able to process this data. They can send it through a bunch of nodes, but when it left, it was green, blue, red. It goes through all these nodes and tells everybody all this information, but then when it gets to the other side, eventually, it's not all confused. It's still green, blue, red. So very complex systems that exist here to help these things happen. We're not going to go too much further in regards to that. Just another thing to show you that networks exists and data flow and processing is very, very complicated. Um, which I think it's important to know because our brains don't work like computers. We can't process information like computers can, which I think is a big issue with the kids and even adults, which I'll give you some examples here that are pretty absurd later concerning those. So finally the internet. So those things kind of led to the internet, right? So this brought about what we call World Wide Web. The thing is, though, the World Wide Web that existed back then is nowhere near what it exists as now. So back then, it was literally read only. Like it was like the news. You literally like you couldn't do anything. You signed in, you read stuff. You didn't get to post on message boards. There was no forums. There was no like Facebook, MySpace. That stuff did not exist back then. So that was Web 1.0. It was literally like read only format. Um, and then Web 2.0 came about. And that's when they took these static web pages, which were read only, and turned it into dynamic user generated content, which would be more of forums, blogs, uh, I guess Twitter, Facebook, things like that, right? So you can see here Web 1.0, read only. 2.0 is very people centric, right? It's kind of a collaboration. That's why they call it the collaborative web. It did enable social networking and user generated content, and that's when kind of apps even started coming out. So uh, you can think about even like Uber or some of these other big apps. Like these are all kind of based within Web 2.0. Um, Google and Facebook really drove this home when they came out. And it actually kind of spurred the growth of the gig economy. Um, People could finally earn money part-time or full-time kind of on the internet, you know. It kind of changed the way that we operate in the world if you think about it. So here's another kind of reiteration, right? So now we have Web 3.0. And you can see there's virtual reality, they have augmented reality there, which with the metaverse. I don't know if y'all know about blockchains and things like that. Have y'all ever heard about blockchains? Okay, so some people do, some people don't. Blockchains kind of are a decentralizing process in a way. We always talk about the government and how it can be corrupt with regulations, yada yada yada. So blockchains are a way to kind of circumvent that, to make a kind of unregulated, centralized type thing, if that makes sense. I can't think of the name of oh, Bitcoin. I couldn't think of it. Bitcoin. Bitcoin is based off of blockchain. So here you can see Web 2.0 actually helped with medical education, right? They had these modern examples here, and this is actually one of Dr. Salgado's slides. The flipped classroom, free open access medical education. It's basically like different forums that you can go into and then kind of, talk with educators, peers, things like that. Twitter journal clubs. They even have, man, what was it? I saw something the other day. It was really interesting. And it was kind of like a Twitter journal club in a way, but it was like it was, man, I should have put it in here. I didn't. Hopefully it'll come to me later. Regardless, it's geared towards a millennial generation of learners. I think, you know, we operate different than our parents, right? And how we learn and how we interact with technology. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. We're much quicker to pick up our phone and, page Dr. Google because who's going to go to a library and like pick up the Britannica anymore? Like it's not happening. So there's also Web 4.0, Web 5.0. Web 5.0 doesn't really exist yet. Web 4.0 is much more complex, if you will. You introduce AI and machine learning. Um, and I told you kind of the decentralization helps remove that monopoly potential. So that way, like just one person can't just manipulate everybody. Web 5.0, I don't know if you've ever seen like, well, Avatar, I'm sure, right? There's also another movie called Surrogates with, what was his name? Who played John McClane? Oh my gosh, Bruce Willis. Um, And it's basically like they sit in this machine, and then that's how you interact with the world. And he was like, no, he finally got out of his machine and started walking around. And it was really, really bad for people's health, actually. It's like people had atrophy, they were totally disconnected, depressed. Interesting movie. There's a couple of other ones here, Inception, Total Recall. Um, Elon Musk has a Neuralink. I don't know if y'all heard about that. You can put this chip in your brain. Apparently, this guy put it in his brain, and then he used a mouse for like 12 hours while he was sleeping or something like that, you know? So yeah, it's kind of crazy that we're kind of coming across to like the cyborg type, model, if you will. So this is Moore's Law. And what I'm getting at is that things are going quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker, especially with technology. It is an exponential curve, and it's a problem because we can't keep up. Um, think about it, dial up was first, then broadband, then cable, then they had, like some versions of satellite, and then finally now we have fiber optic, which is crazy. All of these things kind of led to the going from a telephone to a cell phone, and then finally microprocessors led us to our smartphones, right? So everybody nowadays has a computer in their pocket. It's not just a cell phone. You can see the evolution of chips in the cell phone. It literally is a 1 trillion fold increase in computing performance from the 50s to now. Well, I'm sorry, to the 2015. So it's probably even further than now. And then this graph over here just shows kind of the evolution of different uh, supercomputers and consoles and XYZ. You can see over here on the right, it's actually interesting. So a Samsung Galaxy 6X was like 5 PlayStation 2s. An Apple Watch now is equivalent to 2 Apple iPhone 4s. They a supercomputer is equivalent to 18,400 PlayStation 4. So anyways, long story short, there's a lot of technology advancing very quickly. So if they're processing so fast, how are we processing? Well, we're not processing that fast. MIT found out that we can literally process no faster than 60 bits per second, which is a problem because we exist in the age of information right now. And we can fact check, but can kids? You know? Can your clients? Especially if they have reality distortions and things like that, right? Um, Hickheim law, very interesting concept. The more options that are available, the longer it takes to decide, right? Because you have to kind of try and figure it out. This is why computers are so good. They kind of do that, right? But they don't always do it the best. And I'll explain that a little bit more later. Um, Entropy, I'm not going to go too far in thermodynamics, but entropy is something that we always have to think about. Anytime big changes happen, especially with like evolution, the the order of the system kind of goes all over the place until it kind of stabilizes. But the point is that it stabilizes to be more disorganized. The more disorganized it is, technically, is the more equal, like it's approaching equilibrium. Um, I'm not I'm not a physics major, so I can't really explain much beyond that, but I will go into the branch of the chaos theory, which talks about how over time it looks chaotic, right? But then you can see that there is actually patterns that do come out through that chaos. And that's when it becomes a little more organized, right? But in the beginning, it's like the Big Bang, stuff's floating around, things are being really hot, and everything is in change and flux. So over time, the system does become more organized, but it takes time for that to be realized. And again, especially when within transitionary periods that we have these rapid advancements. So this is Henry Nasrallah. He's the editor in chief for the journal. It's called, I don't want to say it's called Current Opinion. Um, and he basically is talking about how societal entropy undermines mental health. And he kind of talks about the same thing with the thermodynamics, but we can see here on the right that he kind of identifies some of the issues within society right now that are problems, racial tension, toxical political environments, wars. Like there are wars right now happening, social media. It spreads bad news and distorts facts, opioid crisis, lack of certainty about gender identity, crime, and it just keeps kind of going. I really wanted to highlight that he even thinks that social media is an issue. And then the bad news and distorted fact is kind of what we're talking about, because people say we're in the age of information, but I really think that we're in the age of misinformation at this point, you know? Oops, sorry. So again, just evolving as humans. I think right now, the challenge of the human, i.e., the human condition, is kind of navigating that entropy in real time. Um, People that can be resilient and adapt well do well, right? Unfortunately, a lot of our clients come to us to learn those coping skills and different things like that, so that way they can kind of navigate the world and make more sense of it. Um, so what about parents? What does it mean for them? Well, how big is that generational gap, especially now that we've talked about the exponential curve of everything, right? So a lot of times parents can't relate to their kids. Um, I struggle relating to my grandparents sometimes. My grandmother, I love her to death. She's one of the most racist people on the planet, like literally. And it's because that's how she was raised. That's how she was raised. Like that was right at that time. And then eventually things changed and people realized it was wrong. But she's stuck in that train of thought. So, um, did you know that mobile phone adoption in the US is actually starting in late childhood and early adolescence? 53% of kids have smartphones by 11 years old. I had a Razor phone when I was like 16. And I don't know if you remember, like the internet on phones back then, if you signed in, your mom would basically kill you because because you're using money, right? The data was so expensive. Um, but you know, it wasn't just like let me sign into Google, like it wasn't, there was no search bars or even apps on the phone really. Like you had the Snake game, I think. Like that was kind of like it. Um, so anyways, 95% though. This is a big number. 53 at 11, 95% of teens 13 to 17 have some kind of cell phone access. And this is from this study right here. And it's actually pretty recent. It's from 2022. So this is what we look at. This is kids nowadays, unfortunately. At the dinner table, in public, at the park, whatever, you know. So what about the kiddos? Well, 90% report that they do use their phones to pass the time and connect with others. But this is the thing that I think is the biggest, and I alluded to it earlier, learning new things. We all do it. The kids are doing it. Um, the problem is they have problems fact checking and things like that, right? It not only increased access to information in the networking, whether good or bad, for better or for worse, but it also helped speed up the processing of very complex tasks. And it's interesting because now schools are starting to integrate and teach the kids how to use technology. Um, Versus like me, I took a typing class, I think, and then finally in college, I took an Excel course, maybe. Um, but a lot of that stuff is getting pushed into primary school, like K through 12. Well, maybe not K, but you know, primary school. It's just part of the standard curriculum, is what I was trying to get at. So let's talk about Erickson a second. What is it teaching these kids? Well, a lot of the problem with psychosocial development is identity formation, specifically in kids and teenagers, adolescents, right? Values, desires, future roles. These are the things that a lot of children that have access to these cell phones are processing at that point in time. Um, I mentioned theory of mind here because it kind of highlights that again, that it's not just like values can be beliefs, desires, intentions, right? I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Values can be beliefs and desires. They don't have to be just, you know what I mean? And it can be based on your parents' values. It can be based on time values, like my grandmother, who's super racist still, like it depends. Either way, people are kind of, I don't want to say vulnerable, but you're a product of that point in time, right? So here's some Erickson stages just to kind of show you. And then this 12-year to like 19-year period is kind of where the kids are. I'm not going to spend much time here. I'm just going to keep going. So identity. Let's talk about Carl Rogers and humanism for a second. Ideal self versus real self, right? Cognitive dissonance often happens because there's that conflict, right? We have who we want to be, and then we have who um we really are, and when they clash, we don't like that, right? Uh I want to say a hallmark of DBT is to kind of help resynthesize some of these things, right? So you can see here, you have the individual, right? The environment affects that. Like this is what's happening to our kids. There's the individual, they're motivated, they go into the field, they see all these different things, and then they take it all in. The problem is this environment is a virtual environment. It's not real life anymore, and it's not being monitored. So that's where a lot of these issues start coming in. So the internet really serves as a cesspool. It sets unrealistic expectations, reinforces toxic behaviors, and maladaptive coping skills. It also opens vulnerable individuals up to be either manipulated, used, or abused. Um, One of the things I think about a lot is just instant gratification towards patience. Kids don't have patience, and it's because things are so accessible. You know, they've never had to have patience. If it doesn't work right then, like their frustration tolerance is like zero. um, it does not teach kids wellness. It really doesn't teach them empathy for the most part. And I mean, take this with a grain of salt, right? Maybe there is some forums out there that do teach some things about wellness and empathy, but it has the potential to not. Um, the compassion for yourself or others, it doesn't really help with mindfulness. It breeds a lot of toxicity and then cognitive dissonance as well. Um, we talked about this. Kids are still developing their self-worth, their values, identity. So people will use it against them, you know, predators specifically. I don't think we were designed for social approval to curate our lives, and that's kind of what happens with the like button, or even just posting things on, Instagram. I've felt privy to like, checking to see like, did anybody like it yet? You know what I mean? Like it's like an addiction, and it was built that way, it really was. They built it to be persuasive and manipulative. Um, and that's kind of why I wrote the title as I did, because this is the computer science of manipulation. It's a profitable industry, and it stays profitable for a reason. Um, so you can see I found some information that Gen Z as a whole is more fragile, depressed, less risk taking, much more anxious, less social interaction and dating. They don't drive as much. Um, so that's kind of just the generational differences, right? That I was kind of highlighting earlier. I can also talk about kids when they get their phones taken away from them because they're so connected. It's like they have this separation anxiety, which leads to hopelessness, and then they get impulsive. And then sometimes they're just like, well, what can I do right now to get my phone back? They'll say they're suicidal. And a lot of times it's a power play. They are not truly suicidal. And I don't know exactly where they get it from. There is some evidence that says that the internet kind of teaches them to do that, but I think friends could also maybe, perpetuate that culture as well. They do have some evidence too that it does increase in depth. I'm sorry, death. That's supposed to say death. Death and anxiety with teenage girls specifically, and teenagers in general. In 2010, man, it really messed that up there. In 2010 and 2011, and it was self-harm via cutting, specifically in girls at that point in time. They're kind of getting more evidence right now as we go to see if there's males as well, but that's what it was um, at that point in time. It was that population. So we've been talking about it. Vulnerable people, pimps can recruit you online, Snapchat, Twitter, you have Instagram. It can be literally anything. Sex trafficking is a thing. Um, it's real life, you know. People are targeted, and some parents have no clue, like zero. You have access to buy drugs. You can straight up just buy drugs. You don't even have to go on the dark web, you know. You can just go onto the normal internet and then boom, um, it's accessible. So, how powerful is tech industry? Well, it perpetuates through everything. This FANG is literally one of the most powerful entities in the world. It currently comprises 10% of the US stock market. That's $3 trillion industry. We make $31 trillion in America. So 3 trillion of that comes directly from the technology industry. It's not going anywhere. We make a lot of money with it. And it's in every global market. So it's something that we got to figure out how to kind of live with and work with. You can see here is a bunch of different kind of quotes from different people that existed within the computer science industry from the very beginning. They started with hardware and software. Now they don't sell that anymore. They sell you. They sell your children. They sell attention. Corporations are competing for your attention consistently. They're constantly having meetings. How can we increase engagement? How can we get them to interact with this app more? What can we do? And they've actually started writing algorithms to predict how you will behave. Uh, he basically says that the change in the behavior and the perception is what they're buying as well. So it's not just kind of the attention. They are manipulating, you know. So we'll see. I'm gonna go past that. So we can see here too, this kind of is just a big conglomeration, of different things that has been kind of brought out of Web 2.0. Music, events, networking, videos, social curation, service networks. And then you can see all the different kind of, you know, apps and companies and whatnot here. Long story short, it gave everybody a voice, you know. Here's a bunch of different books that talk about how it was manipulated to be persuasive. I'm sorry, it was designed to be manipulative and persuasive. The Social Dilemma is on Netflix right now. It actually talks a lot about kind of some of the things that I'm hinting at. And here's where I was talking about earlier. All of this is powered by algorithms. They don't show you what you want. They show you what's most enticing. They show you what can lead you down that rabbit hole, not necessarily what you're looking for per se. And then they actually did set them up literally, and they talk about this in the Social Dilemma too, and even these books, that they borrowed the idea of swipes and everything from slot machines, and they did it with this variable reward schedule. So there's a lot of behavioral psychology that was built into all of this to manipulate people. Um, Talk about dopamine, and this is actually what I was talking about earlier with uh the unexpected reward, right? And the learning and things like that. They used I can't remember the exact name. I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Habitually checking. Yeah. So it's unexpected rewards. The unexpected rewards increase the dopamine activity. So you can see that unexpected reward right there. It really hits dopamine really hard. Whereas the expected reward is like, so you put something out there and then you don't know what's going to happen. And then next thing you know, your phone blows up and then, all my people are trying to reach out to me and da 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 da. Um, it's addictive. They made it like that. They have engineers and this is from one of the people that like existed in Silicon Valley. They have growth hackers, which are engineers that are literally hired to figure out the psychology of you to how can we get you to engage with our stuff. Um, this is the exploitation of a vulnerability in human psychology. That is straight up the Facebook president saying that, you know, and he left. He's a former Facebook president for a reason. Um, Edward Tufte is another interesting one. He says that the only two industries they call their customers users are drugs and software. Oops. Oops. Yeah. So Google and Facebook. Has anyone ever heard about scientific A/B testing of small change? It's kind of a way to get data and understand what data kind of changes behavior in a way. So they actually did this without anybody knowing. They would have like stuff on their Google would have stuff on their like main pages that you could like click and voluntarily act with, except that they kind of like put it right in front of your face. And then they made it enticing so you would want to click on it. Either way, they can effectively manipulate real world behavior. And they have, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but there was a guy that worked with YouTube that actually effectively was able to manipulate people in voting. Um, and then this just kind of highlights, let's chase that dopamine hit. Like this is what the companies are doing. They're out there trying to figure out what makes you tick and how we can make you stay on our platforms. So long story short, addiction and manipulation based tech, that's where we're at. It's not this tool that you use to get information off the internet anymore. It's like it has its own goals. It's pursuing you. It wants you to interact with it. It sends you push notifications, you know? Um, and then this is what happens. So depression, oops. Depression, poor sleep, anxiety, self-harm, secondary to internet use, cell phone addiction. Lots of studies here that actually hit on that. And again, for some reason, it's higher in girls than boys. We don't know exactly why, but that's kind of what's going on there. It's not just isolated to children. Has anybody heard of Pizzagate? So Pizzagate was like, it was real deal. Apparently, these people thought there was like this ring of pedophiles that were hiding the children in the basement of the pizza place. And they actually showed up to like the place. And you can see like here's some of the stuff in the background that they were using. Like Hillary was involved, and like you know they're pedophile billionaire. Like there was a lot of conspiracy theory stuff that just got too crazy, and people got swept away in it. And then people showed up to a Pizza Hut with like a gun and was like, "Give me the kids," you know. It was wild. Um, And then this is the guy that I was telling you about that worked on the YouTube algorithm, and it was used to manipulate people in voting. He never intended it for it to be like that, you know? So he feels terrible. Like he doesn't know how to kind of deal with it himself because it was supposed to be humane technology, but then it was used in a very vile way. So lots of corporations are out there for profits, and I think it is a big issue. Disinformation for profit business model is basically what we're talking about. People during COVID actually tore down 5G towers because they thought it was spreading the virus. They thought 5G radiation was like the thing that was the issue, and COVID wasn't real. And then that Russia, the problem is Russia and China do spread misinformation, disinformation like that on the internet. Kids don't know that. You know what I mean? It's like cyber war, straight up. Coronavirus is a perfect storm for all this. And, you know, lawmakers are actually starting to do something now because it's a global assault on democracy. It's starting to undermine our power. This is what I was talking about earlier with the conspiracy theorists. You got to be careful because those people can be targeted by people that want to destabilize, well, whatever, and they can use them, get them together, and then, well, Pizzagate. Normal news outlets don't have a chance to spread near as much mayhem as online, right? MIT actually found out that fake news on Twitter spreads 6 times faster than real news. That's crazy. Um, if you want to control the population, there's not a more effective tool than Facebook. It can be weaponized. Myanmar, the country in Myanmar, I think it's a country. Regardless, Myanmar, they would literally have people get you get a phone, and this phone has Facebook on it, and it only has Facebook on it, and that Facebook was the news media outlet, and it basically allowed the military to manipulate all the Muslims in that area. They could kill people, they could rape, they could do whatever they wanted to. So 700,000 people, they ran away. You know, the propaganda has always existed. I know if you think about Cuba back in the day, even Fidel, he used the radio waves. Very, he would try to, we're doing military movements here. They weren't doing military movements, so he used those tactics to help him get into power eventually. Brazilian elections too. There was protests in America as well. There's a lot of ability for it to kind of erode the fabric of society, if you will. And people want to do it. People are out there to do that to us. Countries can manipulate each other without violating borders. So you don't have to drop bombs anymore. You just make the citizens crazy, basically, or make them attack each other, or you know what I mean? Cause dissension, be polarizing. Um, Democracy is basically for sale in culture wars to the highest bidder. And we don't have enough protections right now, which again is why states are trying to do things. So finally, what's the problem? Times have changed. When did you have a cell phone? I told you earlier it was like I was 16 and it was a Razor cell phone. It didn't have internet, all that stuff. So we have to think about this stuff. Not only that, but we have to educate parents kind of the differences, if you will. Uh, the internet's not a safe place for people that are suggestible or otherwise looking for attention. They can get the wrong kind of attention, right? Sex trafficking, human trafficking, things like that. These kids are experiencing the world so much faster than we are, and they don't have training wheels, and there's no supervision. If we can only process at 60 bits, and that might be, on a good day, um, it doesn't matter if you can process 60 bits if you're processing the wrong information and you're fact checking with the wrong stuff, right? So parents need to watch their kids. It's absurd. The tablets given nowadays to, like, for lack of better word, shut the kid up. Like, it's like, hey, you're being unruly. Like, here, just take whatever. I don't care. Like, give me peace and quiet. Take your tablet. And it's terrible. It's actually led to issues because kids don't speak with their mom and dad anymore, and then they have speech delay. So these are electronic activities that you may or may not know of. They're constantly monitoring us and the kids for all those algorithms that I was talking about earlier, whether it's your communications, email, text messages, the metadata about all that. What are you looking at? What kind of stuff are you clicking on? They can tell the click count that you have, or they can tell how long you stop at a certain picture on that web page. They know what catches your eyes, and then what they'll do is they'll try to change the algorithm or whatever to make your news feed more enticing. Um, and then they do that to the kids, and the kids just they don't know. They have no idea. Remember when Facebook got in trouble? Because the microphones, this was back in like 2016, maybe, you know. What's crazy is they were on trial because their advertisers and everybody like used the software. It wasn't like they created a perfect storm and a platform to be manipulated, but it's not like that was necessarily their intentions. And that's kind of the sad story, is that Silicon Valley kind of started out with good intentions, but then it kind of it just got away from that because money got involved and all this other stuff. So here's some other things. Cyberbullying exists. Fear of missing out. Kids, for whatever reason, think they're going to miss out. Less active outdoor time. Infinite news feeds are a thing. Incentivized communication can keep you engaged. Parents, this is another slide from Dr. Salgado. Parents are often out of sync with current technological environment. Um, there's no training or standardized assessments for the use of screen time right now. Uh, and again, it's been identified as a gap. Oops. AI, I'm not really going to go into this too much. But if the kids can't do fact check and we're already biased by our sensory organs, well, they're going to struggle, right? So AI doesn't know the truth per se, and it can't solve the problem of fake news. It can't decide what really truth is. And again, there's no real better thing besides a click. Like you have to look, you have to fact check, you have to do your research. Um, and then this down here, the algorithms that your children interface with, learn them in and out, and they do manipulate them to a T. They can't decipher it, and then they're left to be preyed upon because the parents are caught up in whatever may be going on outside, in the world. So the good, I don't know if anybody saw Don't F with Cats on Netflix. Is pretty wild, but they kind of caught this like killer. You can find organ donors on the internet. People find lost family members. Assistive technology is a good thing for autistic children, networking, streamlining repetitive tasks. Unfortunately, it comes with the bad. So this is kind of what we alluded to in the beginning. You can't have the good without the bad, and we've kind of been talking about it the whole time. The like button was actually made to spread positivity for Facebook, not depression. I think that's huge. They started out with such good intentions, but it became this this mess. People can get trapped by business model addiction, monopolization, economic incentives, shareholder pressure, and no regulation. So that's what lawmakers are trying to do right now. Pros and cons of social media. We've been talking about it forever. I'm gonna leave it alone. So what can we do about it? How can we fix it? Educate, and then educate some more. Kids don't know better. They're vulnerable. They're being targeted. It fits their business model for better or for worse, right? Um, so we have to educate. This is what I was talking about for the Center for Humane Technology. So this place does exist, and they've been trying to do this since the very beginning. However, shareholders, stakeholders, whatever, this got lost in the process. So now officials are finally starting to make new laws. You know, the U.S. Surgeon General released a health advisory here recently in 2023, talking about social media, and it's pretty extensive. A, B, C. I'm not going to go through all of it, and then it continues. You know, and it goes more. So here's a couple of bills too that are in Congress right now, that limit the age of account holders and the access to the platforms by the children. This actually led to Ron DeSantis. Um, I meant to put that slide here. Sorry. So it led to a bill from Ron DeSantis where he's following this, and I'll show you here. I'll show it to you here in a minute. Also, they sent something to Biden apparently that could ban TikTok. It could be January 2025, April 2025, depending. Um, interesting developments going on up there in the world, and why? Because TikTok dysmorphia. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's apparently a real thing. Here's the bill that DeSantis signed. Basically, if you're younger than 14, you can't have an account. Your parents can decide when you're 14 and 15, and that's kind of it. Apparently, the Federal Trade Commission, I think, has to regulate this, and then they're gonna like go check people's accounts, and I don't know exactly how that's gonna play out, but so me rounds is what they used to do. That's where you saw the picture from in the very beginning, with Dr. Salgado, and Dr. Hoy was there too, I think, where they were sitting and talking about things. And basically what you do is this hour monthly session, and you just kind of talk, kind of like what we're doing in a way now, to each other, different ideas, what's new out there. I mean, even within the inception of this presentation to now, it's changed a lot, you know. So that kind of begs the question, without knowing what you don't know, how do you navigate a problem to solve it? Kind of can't, right? How do you solve cognitive distortions? Well, kind of can't. um, and then even what's real and not, it's hard to tell, right? And then it can lead to a lot of these problems here that I stated. Basically, the model has shifted to where we compute and process at a free fee for these paid providers, so that way they can continue to make their money. And people just don't know about it, you know? I'm not saying that technology is all bad, right? There is some good things, but they literally used to give, and the pioneers in Silicon Valley went to this pervasive technology like class at Stanford. Um, and during the case hearings for Facebook, they had to talk about all that stuff. They're like, this is, we were taught to do it this way. Like we weren't trying to do it. This is just the business model. There's a lot of APA recommendations. Um, as far as social media, when you should use it, when you shouldn't. I can send this to you if you want to read these certain things. I only have a couple minutes left, so. And it just goes and goes. Is there too much screen time? Like, is there such a thing as too much screen time? I think it's important that not only the timing, but also the quality. And that's something that they've been talking about within the child realm, if you will, is that it's timing and quality. It needs to be, short and good quality for them to actual benefit from it. Because education is a real thing and it happens there too, right? And then these are basically the updated 2020 standards for kids and screen time. So until they're 18 months, you should basically limit it to video chatting only, right? And then maybe you should do co-watching at 18 to 24. 2 to 5, they shouldn't get more than an hour on the weekdays and 3 hours on the weekends. So these are very, very strict, and these are all based on kind of the current research that's available. Assistive devices, we talked about it a little bit earlier, so not all bad, right? Autism uses these devices to kind of help them. Did anybody ever see the Truman Show? So it's another good one, right? If you think about it, there's technically 2.7 billion Truman Shows going on right now. And it's everybody's news feed. It's everybody's virtual world that they've built. But they haven't really built it. It was built for them by these companies in a way, you know? Uh, and then I kind of wanted to hit here that what the parents see on their feed isn't what the kids see on their feed, right? And that's kind of that Truman Show like vibe, if you will. And that's it. Is it
Super interesting. Thank you so much. I do have a question. Sometimes it feels like it's going to be harder to take back if they already use the technology a lot. And for parents, it's very hard if the kid already uses it a lot to kind of like set those limits. What do you say? What do you do when you encounter like these extremes that we have to like turn it back, but parents don't even know how?
so there is, when they said it in here, let me see. Basically, they talked about obviously you want to start in the beginning, so setting expectations from the beginning is the best way. But if you've already kind of crossed that bridge, um, they talk about, where is it? Did I accidentally delete it? I might have. They basically talk about kind of an open door policy, if you will. And it's kind of like doing social media rounds with your kids in a way, to where you can all meet together and share in a way social media, so that way you can kind of show them how vulnerable they are and things like that, to kind of put it in a way to where they don't feel like you're just punitively trying to take something away. I feel like that's the biggest things. When kids don't understand why you're doing what you're doing, they're resistant to it. However, if you can kind of explain to them and show them examples specifically of people being maybe manipulated or whatever it is, then they can really understand how vulnerable they are. Um, Kids can't know what they don't know. So it's kind of one of those things where you have to start that conversation. I just don't know, and it's got to be case by case. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like for each different person, you know. Um, and then even is the kid autistic? Can they talk? You know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff to kind of consider, but that's what I would try to say to do is just start a conversation somehow, and then kind of see where it goes, you know, and then kind of gauge it from there. Um, I don't think kids are going to be responsive to like, hey, Facebook's is trying to manipulate you, and the algorithms aren't, you know, like they just it's a little too much. But with the knowledge that you have, you could kind of maybe start some narrative that explains that to them in a way. I don't know. Does anyone have experience kind of having to deal with this with patients or clients?
I actually had, well, I think a lot of us probably are faced with that nowadays, where you mentioned this, Dr. Ross, that clients will say like they'll threaten to like harm themselves or because they get their phone taken away and or they just become very extremely aggressive because of that. So I honestly I have a question about that. I don't know how have you dealt with that? Because and it kind of ties into what Celia already had asked you a
Yeah.
little bit. But yeah, it's just such a common thing, and you brought up a good point that a lot of the times it's not even like they're actually suicidal. It's just a way to manipulate their parents
Yeah,
into getting their phone back.
absolutely.
But it is such a tricky um space, right? Because then you have to really decipher whether this, child
Yeah.
who lives in an age where technology is, very like taking over their lives. Like,
Yeah.
would they really actually go through and hurt themselves because they don't have their phone? Like, it's such a decision to make. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know, for us, I feel it's like very tricky too.
You know, I'm gonna jump off the bridge myself and say that there probably is some people out there that have hurt themselves, maybe killed themselves because maybe not because like mom took the cell phone away, but social media for sure, you know. I think that's why it's coming out now too, that like even with the screen time in the beginning, with the developmental process, you have to understand that when you have this cell phone that's like a slot machine, you are altering the like neurochemical basis of development in the child. So it's like their reward systems are primed totally different, you know? Um, and that's a problem. And I think that addiction mindset, which has been set in for maybe X amount of years, it's gonna be hard to get rid of sometimes. And that's why these kids get so like they don't know what to do with themselves. But I think it's important to remember too that it is kind of like addictive behavior does have extinction at some point, but you got to remove that stimulus. And that's kind of another thing too, is that these kids need to know that this phone is it's a drug. It does the same thing as a drug. It releases dopamine, it creates the reward cycle, and makes you want to come back for more. When you don't get what you want, then you're like kind of down, you know? Like it's just it's basically gambling, you know? You're swiping for likes. You're like it's I don't know how else to exactly explain it, but I think that just being able to have more and more of these conversations is really what can help because kids are pretty smart, you know. Nowadays I have conversations with 10-year-olds and I'm like, man, was I even like I don't know if I was could I comprehend that at that point? I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't have an exact answer to say. And we don't know. We don't know yet. That's why they have some of these recommendations. Um, you can screen them for problematic social media use. You can bring up the cyber hate and things like that. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you have your child telling you like, "Hey, I'm gonna kill myself if you don't give me my stuff." And it's like, dude, like, is that all this world is to you? Your cell phone? You know? And I think that's another thing too, is that we have to be more adamant about like getting kids out in nature and like experiencing stuff. Like get away from the cell phone. You want to go see a waterfall? Let's go see a waterfall, like whatever it is. I don't know. Yeah, sorry I don't have the greatest answers here. Is that the same ones? It is.
It's okay. I think you're right. I think it's, everything's pretty new and we're still kind of uncovering everything and like, yeah, because it's just, yeah, I was just thinking about that because it is very tricky, right, for us even because we're working from, like for us, it might seem very like irrational to take things to that extent or to,
Yeah.
of like hurting yourself for a phone. But again, we're from a different, age maybe where the technology wasn't like, it was
Yeah.
there, but maybe it wasn't to the, like what you're saying, like it didn't rewire our like reward system in the way that it's doing to kids
Was
now. So
our screen time was different. You know what I mean? I had inordinate amounts of screen time as a kid, but it wasn't like that. You know what I mean? There wasn't the constant comparisons, the trying to get people's attention, or like for I do it for the gram, like it's just it wasn't there yet. Uh so yeah, it's again, I think that's why it's really important for people to know. And like if I try to have this conversation with like my parents, they'll hear me out, but at the same time, political agendas and things like that kind of skew things too. Ah, you liberal, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, bro, like, all right, whatever. Keep watching Fox News, like. But that's the thing, even that kind of media, Fox News is actually more harmless than Facebook, apparently. So yeah, it's crazy. Just the day we live in, the age we live in right now, you just don't know what the information is. And I think that's the biggest problem that kids need to understand is that you've really got to be careful with what's influencing you because you don't know what's on the other end of that. There's stories of people getting catfished, right? And stuff like that too. And people are predated all the time. So we don't want to kind of spark anxiety and fear in them, but at the same time, we need them to understand the consequences of these behaviors and what can really happen. I think that's why I wanted to record this, so that way I could like literally like just start giving it to people, like, hey, because this is important to me. I see so many kids come on the unit, Baker acted, cell phone, you know, and I'm just like, what's going on, man? Why? It's like I had screen time. What's different, And this is kind of what I came up with. But a lot of people don't know, and a lot of people are scared because they don't want their kids to kill themselves or, but they have evidence too that apparently the social media tells the kids like, hey, if your parents try to take your phone away, this is what you can do to get it back. So it's absurd.
thank you.
I wanted to ask, was there any, as far as like feedback for the presentation, was there anything as far as like what was confusing or what? I know it's a lot and I probably still didn't touch everything as much as I wanted to. Um, but if anyone could give feedback as far as like what could be better, you know what I mean? I know
I
that's a
wanted to
loaded question, but
do
Go ahead, Sylvia.
on the news last week, I saw that AT&T has a test for children, for parents that they don't know if their children should have a phone. and they show the parent and the children complete the test together, and it says your child might be too young to have a cell phone, or your child might be responsible enough to have a cell phone. So that could be something that maybe you can look into and see if it applies to this, because it's a way for parents to have like one more approval before they actually decide to give the phone. And it comes from AT&T. I think they have it on their website. Is my child old enough to have a phone? And there's a questionnaire that they can complete.
Well, I guess this is being recorded, right? So that I'll just kind of look at it. I was looking for like a pen or something to write on, and I don't have one right now. But no, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for that. I didn't know that was out there. And that's kind of the thing.
So,
We all have to talk about this because we don't know, right? We're colleagues and we're all learning together. So sorry, I mean,
so don't worry about it. I remember I gave a presentation with the topic of FOMO for some university a few years back. And while I was researching, I came across a new term that they were developing that it might explain, and I usually use it to explain to parents how a child is feeling whenever they take or limit the the technology time, the screen time. It's called nomophobia, which comes from no mobile attached or no mobile present.
yeah.
They suggested it as a diagnosis for the DSM, but the DSM, they did not approach the term, but it can be used in order for them to understand what it is that they're feeling. Like it's this fear and phobia of not being able to have their mobile phone with them. And one of the things I use to explain it is that sometimes, we're looking in our backpacks or our purses, where's my phone? Where's my phone? And we have it right there. That heart drop feeling, that's what they're feeling all the time whenever they don't have their phones in their hands. So that's maybe something that you can not add, or I don't know if it helps in any way, but
Yeah,
I
no,
just wanted to point it out there.
no, thank you so much. Yeah, no, I ask because I come, well, I mean, we're both in the mental health field, right? But I come from a little bit different training. So um and I'm a little bit older, I think, too. And I don't know whose age is what, but either way, me being in my 30s, I know things are different with the generations that come before me or after me, sorry. So that's why I'm always like trying to find out, like, hey, what did you experience? What did you do? How does this um because I'm biased, you know?
I think it's also different for us. For example, I think in my case, I'm the youngest in the class, but still I do see a difference with kids right now. And I'm questioning myself if it also has to do with the fact that they encountered COVID and the quarantine during a specific moment in their development. So that was the only way they could still feel connected to the outside world, because we were all inside just trying to figure out how to deal with the pandemic. But at the same time, for me, even though I do feel I feel that disconnect with the new generation, just because I experienced life in a different way. Even though it could still be kind of similar, I do remember a lot of things that you guys mentioned before, and that I had experienced. Like I used a floppy disk, and when I asked my cousins who are like 10 years younger than me, oh, I was talking about a floppy disk, and they said, what is that? I felt, no, like, what are you guys doing now, right? But at the same time, I think they also have experienced different disasters, because it's type of a natural disaster too, the pandemic, in terms of how we were able to manage it, and in the specific moment they experienced it. I think it could also be impacting how they relate to social media, internet, and all those areas, different as we do.
Absolutely. No, I think that's why they even kind of hit, and this is Generation Alpha, I think, is who is the current generation, if I'm not mistaken. But Gen Z is different than millennials, and I'm a millennial. So we already had increased anxiety, less driving, more isolation, and that was before COVID. So I'm curious, like you said, to see what that does look like, you know. And I mean, I know I struggle with issues relationship wise from just being too proximity, like you know, like I don't talk to her anymore. You know what I mean? It was bad, but it got to that point. It was just like I can't I need space. I need space. You can't give it to me. Sorry, you know. Um, but it's weird too. I feel like people don't know how to be alone nowadays. You know what I mean? And it's because of this social media. And I think that's the biggest thing is we have lost the ability to be comfortable with ourselves, period. You know, and it's perpetuated by this kind of stuff. Um,
I think actually with that, people will be alone like with their phones,
yeah,
like with on social media, right? I think it's more that than I don't know if that's what you're getting at.
no. I'm saying
Like they have to be on.
like in general, like just like when's the last time that someone, well, I'll say it for myself, like the last time that I like went on a walk by myself or something without my phone, or you know what I mean? Was probably last week. But again, work does pull me to my phone a lot too. So that's another thing to kind of consider as well. But I just feel like people compare themselves so much to other people, and then they feel the need to have to interact with, and I'm not saying we don't need to have people, right? We need people. Um, but I think that we have to be able to be comfortable with like loneliness. It's okay to feel lonely sometimes, you know, and maybe alone was the wrong word. But it's all right to be lonely. And I think that people can use social media to help with that, but it cannot be that's instant gratification, right? Oh, I'm lonely. Let me pick up my phone. Let me talk to somebody. It's like, well, what happens when you don't have that? You know, what happens?
Bored or I'm bored. Like usually kids go to like social media because they're
Yeah.
bored. Everything just
Do something else. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the thing I think is the problem is the instant gratification. It's like you need that stimulus, you know. It's like I need that dopamine, but you really don't. You can get the same dopamine out there in real life. And I think that's the thing that people don't understand too. So I think we have to be more connected with nature and each other on a physical level versus the virtual world. But it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So I don't know. And I'm obviously kind of just on my soapbox right now, just kind of talking off the cuff. But um, and I say that because there's no real like evidence for this last little part. So I don't. What do you have to be somewhere? I didn't know. It
no,
never.
I think here, right? Till
Yeah.
11. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. No, I just wanted to
But
make
you're
sure
good.
y'all had somewhere to be. I didn't want to interrupt or make y'all late or, you know, I have to be somewhere at 12, but that's not until then. Any other topics or things, questions, any? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate the feedback. Um, it's always fun kind of just talking about different ideas and things that could, you know, potentially help or where it could go or um so yeah, thank you. I really appreciate this kind of like intellectual conversation. How would I get the I guess the recording